moment. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello and welcome to Dave and Mackie's Shiny Side Out on, well, Freedom Slips, really, and Revolution.radio. If you want to listen to us, this is show number 650, and this is the second hour. We're going to talk about monolithic builders. That's right, like we have been for a little while. So hopefully you're still interested, but it is a topic that's near and dear to us because, funnily enough, as our civilization is sort of, I don't want to say we're going to doomsday or whatever, but certainly we are facing a number of existential challenges, let's call them, right? And such as they are, it seems that civilizations before us have faced those challenges as well. So there are a number of indicators, pieces of evidence, hard, concrete, physical evidence that civilizations that reached a fairly high level of sophistication, different to what we have today, but nonetheless a high level of sophistication, arose in the dim and distant past. I mean, some of the evidence is extremely anecdotal and a lot of people in academia believe a lot of the evidence might be fraudulent. I'm talking about things that were embedded in really ancient coal seams, gold chains, pots, etc. Tens and hundreds of millions of years before that should have been should have happened. But even more recently, if you look at the things that are left by this civilization, or these civilizations potentially, these massive stone constructions. I mean, we're talking massive, and for the last few weeks, that's all we've been talking about: massive stone constructions. And it makes no sense to build this way. None at all, zero. It makes no sense at all. But they did build like this, right? So the question is why did they build like this? What's the point? But they did. We would have a hard time today replicating this. It would be completely cost prohibitive, even if we could do it. And some things we just couldn't do. Some things we couldn't do. We couldn't lift some of these things, these stones, right? And we would pour concrete just like the Romans did. That's a smart thing to do. We wouldn't have massive stones and move them around. That's just silly. But they did. The funny thing is this, though, right? The only thing that would be left of us if we were to perish in some kind of catastrophe would be massive stone constructions, most likely. Right? Glass, steel, plastic, everything eventually disappears. Okay, all our favorite building materials, which happen to be glass and steel, they would disappear fairly quickly, in fact. Okay, even if there were no catastrophe that destroyed land structures, even if that didn't happen, just time and weather and nature would just claim it all back and obscure it. It would go. It would just simply disappear. No trace. In 10,000 years, there'd be hardly anything left. In 50,000 years, 100,000 years, forget about it. A million years, nothing, except massive stone artifacts. They would be very weathered if they were exposed to the elements, but they would still be there. Now, we can't date them because they're stone. We can date the stone, but we can't date the moment they were constructed or shaped.
When they were shaped, cut. Yeah.
Correct. Can't do it. Can't be done. So but nonetheless, so in a million years from now, let's say, another civilization arises, and the pyramids would still be there, extremely weathered, I'd say, but they'd still be there. And then whoever was near it at the time, or whatever civilization was closest to it in time, the pyramids would then be attributed to them. Just how it is. Same with these massive Olmec stone heads that were found buried in the earth. Let's say that happens again in a million years. They dig them up again because they would be covered by earth again, and earth preserves them really well, right? These stone heads, they wouldn't be much worse for wear. They are dug up, and in a million years from now, they would be attributed to whatever culture is closer in time and space to that particular stone head. That's just what happens. That's what happened to all the things that we are sort of proxy dating today. Göbekli Tepe. Right? Now, we think it's that old because of various reasons. Okay, that doesn't make any sense to us. We're not sure quite who built it. And we've now stopped digging it all up because... Well, that's a good question. Why? Why do we stop excavating? Why do we start, growing olive trees in that space? What? And guess what? The World Monetary Fund has got its hand in it. What? Why are we talking about those guys? I want to talk about monolithic builders, Mackie. I don't want to talk about the World Monetary Fund. Sure. This is the thing. There'd be nothing left of us at all in even 10,000 years. Nothing. And we, human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens, such as we are, have now been pushed back to 300,000 years before now. When I was a child, it was 100,000 years, and Neanderthal was our ancestor. I remember this very clearly. Neanderthal was our ancestor, and we came around. In fact, the very first show notes I had for the hypothesis, right? This was 2012, 13, something like that, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
In those very first show notes, it still talks about 100,000 years.
That's right.
And Neanderthal being our ancestor. Right, as little as 13, 14 years ago. That has now been completely upended due to genetic evidence, improved scientific research facilities and methodologies, as well as tests, where we now know, well, no, that's not true. Neanderthal is not our ancestor. Neanderthal is our contemporary, and not even our cousin, our brother, our sister.
And they were,
because
they were bigger and stronger than us.
Sure.
With a bigger brain.
We could procreate with those guys because we've got the DNA. Denisovan, we've got the DNA. A couple other species we don't know about. We got the DNA. The DNA is there of someone. Okay? To be clear. So it's really fascinating where this DNA evidence is leading us all. So there's also a few bottleneck events we discussed with you guys as well in the past. But now we're looking at these monolithic structures, these huge, massive stone structures all over the world. Not only that, all quite similar. And sometimes exactly the same. And if not exactly the same, quite similar. And there's this massive resistance, and that's really why we're doing the show, to people like, always Daniken, of course, but Graham Hancock certainly, Robert Bauval, Robert Schoch, not Mark Lehner. The name escapes me. I do apologize, but there's this massive resistance. John Anthony West. There was this massive resistance against any of these people that had something new to bring to the table. Rather than having ad hominem attacks and trying to discredit them and their character, let's look at the evidence they present. Let's look at it. Is it really far-fetched, and is it really all wrong? Okay, well, what part is wrong? Let's learn from this. Okay, well, maybe there wasn't an Asian culture, 14,000 years ago, right? Now, I for one believe there have been cultures on this planet for, in my mind, millions of years. And extinction level events and catastrophes have always destroyed them. And that's really what led me down the path of the hypothesis. Why, was my question. Why did all these cultures go the way of the dodo? Why? What happened? Is this a plan? And anyway, if you listen to the hypothesis, then you probably know what I'm talking about. But it was that, Dave. It was actually that initial question as to the, I guess the recurring destruction in my mind of high civilizations before ours, and the triggers. Because in my mind there was more than one. And we have evidence and stories and mythology for more than one as well. And I just didn't understand why that would happen. Why? Nonetheless, there we are. And here we are, right? And we're talking about these. This is incredible because it's all very much the same, right? These structures, and again, why build with such huge structures and huge blocks of rock? And I don't care what kind of rock it is. I mean, if it's a big rock, it's going to be heavy and hard to maneuver, right? We know the Romans couldn't have built the platform of the Jupiter temple. In fact, that's not how the Romans built at all. They had a hard time getting the obelisks from Egypt into Rome. It took the reign of 3 emperors in 30 years to get one of the obelisks to Rome. And they were smaller than the Baalbek stones. They were cut in pieces too. If these engineers had existed in Roman times that could move these 1,000-ton blocks, then we should see that everywhere. Because if the Romans were one thing, it was great engineers. The roads they built are still there today. The concrete they used is still there today. The aqueducts they built, they're still there today. They were really, really good engineers. I mean, top notch, and some of the things we haven't equaled yet. Certainly not the concrete. But they couldn't do that. And they would have looked at you and go, why would we, are you stupid? They would have looked at you. Et tu stupidus, eh? Brute? And they would be right. It'd be stupid. But nonetheless, there it is. So someone was stupid, clearly, did this. But it's a stupid undertaking. It makes no sense. Someone did it. The Romans wouldn't have, because they weren't stupid and they didn't have the means to do it, right? And it was done, and there it is. And how old is it? We don't know. We don't know. How old do we think it is? Well, maybe it is old. Maybe that old. We date by looking at organic material nearby. Now that's stupid. Sorry. If it is on top of it, if the rock, the monolith, is on top of the organic material, knock yourself out. Right? So if there's a bone that was crushed by putting that huge monolith there,
that's right.
Great. Now we know where it was placed. Check that bone. If you are analyzing the remains of a fire nearby, you should maybe look for another job. Do something else. This is not. This is not for you. Do something else. Sorry, I've been talking a lot, Dave, but I just wanted to some of the things, and it needs to be context. I mean, why are we talking about it? What's the point? The point is that there were high civilizations in the past that disappeared. There was a tools down event. Globally. What happened? I don't know. The flood myth is universal. And what makes it convincing are not the similarities, but the differences. Not all the flood myths talk about gods or God helping the survivors. Some just survived by sheer luck, just in a cave or in a log or something. Right?
Or they went up a mountain. That's right.
Yes,
whatever it happened to be. Yeah.
100%. Some talk about fire raining down. Some talk about the civilization was punished for cannibalism. Quite a few places in the world talk about that. The places around the Indian Ocean talk about the rain of fire. What?
Yeah, it rained fire and water. That's right.
What? But
and
only
that's consistent with a meteor strike.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Others talk about massive floods, and if you talk about these glacial lakes, I mean, you look at it's called the Badlands up in the north of America.
Scablands.
Scablands, sorry, I always forget. Scablands. And if you see that, the volume of water is incomprehensible to me that was released. And of course, with the impact, there would have been massive rain because a lot of water would have evaporated, gone into the atmosphere, and come down as massive rain. And the impact would have created tsunamis. But not only that, all the glacial lakes the dams would have broken, if you will, right? And the glaciers would have melted, etc., etc. A lot of things would have happened that would have caused a massive inundation event. Massive. And it was the Ice Age. So there was a lot of water that was landlocked, right? Now, the ice in the water, nobody cares about. Nobody cares about the ice in the water. Nobody. Why? Because if it melts, it doesn't change the water level at all.
That's
Zero.
Right.
If you put ice cubes into your glass and then you fill it up with whatever water, any drink you want, those ice cubes melting will not change the level. In fact, it'll probably fall because ice expands. As it melts, it contracts. There'll be less liquid in your glass after all the ice is melted. Okay?
It's very marginal, but you'll notice that the ice floats with some of it above the water level.
100%.
So that's displacement, buoyancy, and when it melts down, it's to the naked eye it would be the same height. The water level doesn't change when the ice.
Well, I've got an extremely exacting German eye. I see it all the time, but that's okay. That's just me. And no, but
that's that
seriously,
German accuracy there.
Yeah, that's right. The land ice, though.
Yep.
That's the problem. If the land ice melts, it will increase seawater levels significantly, and it did. 100 meters. 100 meters.
That's right.
100 meters. If
300 feet for those other people.
And Dave and I with some funny thing last week after the show, we looked at the coastlines of all the continents, and if you look at it, you can see the rivers running down and underwater into the oceans. And if you dropped the the water level by 100 meters, then all those now submerged areas, which are not ocean floor yet, they're quite low. I mean, they're not that deep, 50 meters, 100 meters, whatever. They would all have been land. They would have all been land.
That's
and
right.
I maintain that during the last ice age, right? Not the Younger Dryas when it all melted, but during the last ice age, there was more land hospitable to life available to us than there is now.
Yeah,
because
almost perfectly flat. You have a look at all these, like tablelands all around the edge.
And all of these lands that are now submerged, there would have been land bridges everywhere. You could walk everywhere, pretty much along the equator. And you look at Sunderland, you look at Doggerland, and we know these places existed. We know this now for a fact. In fact, the Doggerland, we're dredging the ocean floor there, and we're finding a whole bunch of signs of habitation, right? Because it was. The Mediterranean, in my opinion, was probably a lot drier than it is today. I think there was like probably an inland lake, but a lot lower water level than it is today, and it wasn't like a big inland sea like it is today. And I think all these lands that used to exist, and you have to also understand that the climate around the equator would have been a lot more mild than anything else. In fact, milder than it is today. Today it's very hot.
That's right.
It wouldn't have been quite as hot during the ice age due to various climatic variables, the jet streams and the general temperature of the earth, etc., etc. I mean, it'd still be warm, don't get me wrong, right? But I don't think it would have been anywhere near as hot as it is today around the equator. And you know what the other thing is? The seasons wouldn't have impacted people as much as they do us today, because the seasons only impact you the further you move away from the equator. Within a narrow banding of a couple hundred kilometers around the equator.
And because we wouldn't have been strayed too far from the equator.
That's right. Exactly. Within a couple hundred kilometers or even more, there aren't really any seasons. I mean, there are fluctuations in weather patterns, but there is no winter, summer, spring, and autumn. It just doesn't exist.
It's like wet and dry usually.
Correct. And flat earthers, I know you hate this, but this is how it works. The only reason we have seasons is because the Earth's axis is tilted at 23.5 degrees. Why does that matter? In winter, the portion of the Earth that experiences winter is tilted away from the sun. Oh, and the other side of the Earth, which is of course then tilted towards the sun, is experiencing summer. Okay, and as the Earth makes its way around the sun, right, that reverses. Okay, this tilt exposes first one and then the other hemisphere of the Earth to the sun, creating the seasons. But only if you're really far away from the equator or from the pole, because the pole or the poles and the equator don't really experience seasons. Not really. Okay, so not the way the rest.
The easiest way to describe this, if you have a torch with a very narrow beam on it, say it produces, if you have it parallel to the floor and you shine it on a wall, it'll be a perfectly round circle, right? There'll be some, some light diffusion around the edge, but just let's concentrate on the beam of light itself. So if you were to shine it a little higher up the wall, you'll see that the round circle becomes an elongated or a oblate circle, right? It's like a pear shape, and the surface area that pear shape occupies is larger than the round circle when it was parallel, tangential to the wall. But when you're doing it on an angle, that is a greater surface area. Now it's the same if you have to consider one thing in physics, and that is that circle is a finite amount of kilojoules of light coming from the torch. But when you do it on an angle, you have the same amount of kilojoules now over a wider area, and therefore the kilojoules per square millimeter are less. That's the easiest way to describe it to anyone in Physics 101.
Yes, correct.
All right, now that makes it all work, but it doesn't make flat Earth work. I'm sorry.
No flat. You see, the funny thing, sorry, it's a bit of an aside, but I asked the question. So how do the seasons work in the flat Earth? And I'm curious. I mean, if you got all the answer for everything, just tell me. Okay, so what happens? The sun magically jumps. What? Yeah, the sun jumps closer and further away. That's what happens. And at that point, I realized I can't talk to that person anymore. It's
that's the end of that conversation.
It's just
thank you.
All over. It's just magically jumps. Okay. I had my fill of magical thinking that day. And no, look, hey, I don't hate you guys. You have the right to believe whatever you like.
Whatever you want.
And if one day you prove it, right? I really would like to see it. I'd love to see it. If you can prove the flat Earth.
If you can make a model that works, that'd be great.
I'd love to see it. But sorry,
Becky.
So
this is my sorry, I can't help it. So, 1 minute. If you can prove it yourself that that the flat Earth is wrong, by looking up at the night sky, anywhere but the poles. If you're in the middle, like equatorial or in the temperate zone, this will work for you. You look up at the sky, and you'll notice that there's 2 points of rotation in the sky. It's like you're on the inside of a cylinder that's turning, because when you look south, you'll see a point of rotation in the sky, which is anti-clockwise, and when you look to the north, you'll see a clockwise turning of the stars. If it was a flat Earth, from wherever you were, you would see only a single point of rotation. That's it. That's the proof. You don't need fancy science. You don't need NASA, because flat earthers don't believe in NASA, because that breaks all the rules. You don't need yourself to go up into space to see it. You can see it from wherever you are, and that's enough. Just you on your own doing that experiment. Because there's no model in flat Earth that makes it work with 2 different points of rotation. There just isn't. It's impossible. Standing on a record, like on a record player, looking up, there's only a single point of rotation.
Says you. Don't worry, guys. They've gotten to Dave clearly. What?
Yeah, well, Becky, I don't know about you, but it's lovely down here in the underground base underneath Denver Airport. I just love it.
It's the best. But look, it was just sort of halfway. We're halfway through the show now, so I just thought we needed a bit of context. I think we're about halfway through. I think so, right? Yeah, actually, we're exactly halfway.
Yeah.
So look, it was really important just to level set it, because what's the whole point? I mean, why talk about it? What's the difference, right? Who cares, essentially, right? It's very, very important. It's very important. What destroyed those civilizations?
Mm-hmm.
What happened? What information do we still have left from that time? And people talk about the Vatican archives and the Smithsonian and a whole bunch of other places where secret knowledge is stored. And I reckon that's a thing. Absolutely, it's a thing. We know the archives exist. We know the Smithsonian exists. We know. And whenever something was found in America, at least maybe else in the world, but the Smithsonian was the first to grab it, right? Always first. Vatican Archive. I mean, the Catholic Church has been everywhere, and they've taken everything from everywhere. Of course they have.
Yeah.
When the Spanish were out there, colonizing the world, the Catholic Church was right behind them. So, same with the Italians, the Portuguese, everybody else. The Catholic Church was right there collecting stuff all over the world. The Nazis did a good job trying to collect stuff. Head off to them.
Oh yeah, they hunted the planet for it.
They did. The question is, where is it now? Don't know.
No.
Smithsonian? So who knows? Point is that there are hordes and hordes, and I mean hordes, of treasure and artifacts and potentially texts, right? That are completely gone from public view, and we'll have a chat about that, and there's so many shows we need to do. But sorry, Dave, I've been talking a lot. Why don't you go and take us through the text, my friend?
Well, we're talking about Baalbek.
Yes, we are.
So, there are those that believe what modern academia claims, that they were cut, these are large stones, and moved to create a giant foundation for the Temple of Jupiter by Roman Emperor Augustus. Here's the reason why we have this month name, August, in 27 BC or thereabouts. We believe, as do many others, that the Romans reclaimed and constructed on top of a much older prehistoric platform built by some of those megalithic builders of old. Many sites around the world have been reclaimed and recycled, so to speak, by the newer generations, cultures and or civilizations. Look all over Mexico, for example. We find land and temples often reclaimed, then built on top of the older, more ancient ruins, etc. This process of reclamation occurred worldwide and not just in the New World. If you look closely, you'll notice the foundation stones are massive. You'll also notice halfway up, I'm actually going to put this on the screen again. If you'll notice halfway up, there on the side, on one side, there is a huge block, then no more. The rest of the foundation is filled in with much more manageable, smaller stones. We can clearly see two different types of construction. I'm just using the mouse to say, well, these are the large stones sitting on top, smaller ones, and then larger stones on top, and then on top of those, much smaller, more manageable, movable stones. Meki, since we're speculating,
what other locations around the globe can we find possible artistic representation of a possible older line? In ancient China, there can be found ancient paintings which seem to show some rather peculiar physical traits, which can be seen interpreted as possible signs of or knowledge of other types of people, and in fact may depict certain, albeit diluted, physical characteristics among those of their own ancient cultures. So there's some couple of pictures here you might want to share, Dave. Perfect. What do we find in ancient Egypt? The Egyptians loved, and more often than not, depicted symmetry in their art, figurines, and statues. What, if any, possible examples can we find there? Could again simply be a combination, or could it be of the author's overactive imagination and coincidence? Again, there's a few pictures here to share. And then there's ancient Jomon. We cannot discuss ancient Korea, Japan, or even China without first mentioning the ancient people known as the Jomon. The Jomon culture was, in existence probably 10,500 of the Common Era to 300 of the Common Era, 300 BC. So 10,500 BC to about 300 BC. That's when the Jomon, Homon, existed. The Jomon period, which encompasses a great expanse of time, constitutes Japan's Neolithic period. Its name is derived from the court markings that characterize the ceramics made during this time. The Jomon people were semi-sedentary, living mostly in pit dwellings arranged around a central open space, and obtained their food by gathering, fishing, and hunting. While the many excavations of Jomon sites have added to our knowledge of specific artifacts, they have not helped to resolve certain fundamental questions concerning the people of the Proto-Literate era, such as the ethnic classification and the origin of their language. And there's a few, I guess, dolmens here, pictures as well.
That's crazy. How did they lift those up to that?
I mean, that's a bit nuts, right? Then why don't you take Korean prehistory?
The Korean Academy of North America discovered ancient human fossils originating from about 100,000 BC in the lava at a stone city site in Korea. Fluorescent and high magnetic analysis indicate the volcanic fossils may be from as early as 300,000 BC. The best preserved Korean pottery goes back to the Paleolithic times around 10,000 BC, and the Neolithic period begins around 6,000 BC.
Korean dolmens. The Gangwon dolmens are in Korea, and have the highest. Korea has the highest concentration of dolmens, in fact, in the world, with over 30,000, possessing between 40 to 50% of the world's total. The island of Gangwon contains several dolmens, one of which has the biggest recorded stone in South Korea and measures at 2.6 by 7.1 by 5.5 meters, which is 101 cubic meters. The Gangwon dolmen are accredited with capstones weighing 300 tons at Gochang. When discussing the ancient Jomon, many have their opinions, usually based on modern-day nationalistic values, as their source of origin. Below is a map showing how the Chinese view their possible migration. There's a map here which shows you how they think the dolmen people spread across Asia and then even into Africa. The oversimplistic, again nationalistic Chinese view of events seems a little ridiculous. During the period in question, there were no national boundaries, no artificial lines drawn on maps. This is a period in time way before even ancient China existed. It seems that if there were an ancient group of fairly sophisticated builders, that they would have migrated as they saw fit, falling along rivers to the oceans and hunting along animal migration routes, etc. Dave?
Yeah, totally. And it still doesn't count for the pyramids. That's all right. Japanese ruins underwater. Now, I do love this, and it is in our slide deck, but it comes up from time to time. All right. A possibly prehistoric site was recently found off the coast of one of Japan's southernmost island. It was not built by anyone. It is mostly a large single site of living rock, so it says. It was possibly carved on or used during a prehistoric period in time when the location was above water. Now, we mentioned this already, when the sea level was much lower. There is plenty of circumstantial evidence for this activity. This site should be recognized as an early sign of ancient man in the area. And there's a picture of the rock, which I'm going to share on screen. And this has been, scanned underwater and, catted. And here you go. And that is not a natural formation, which I remember hearing those arguments for so long with people refusing, Meki, to acknowledge that this even existed. Like
Graham Hancock actually went diving there, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So we do not know who lived along those now submerged coastlines. There is a rather interesting group who were the original peoples of both Japan and the southernmost part of Korea, known presently as was that Ainu?
Ainu.
Ainu?
Ainu.
All right. And now over to you.
Okay, the ancient Japanese Ainu. So just to be clear, the Ainu are the I guess the Aboriginals, the indigenous people of Japan that were there before what we now refer to as the Japanese people, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of pictures here of the Ainu people, and they don't really look Japanese per se.
No.
Right? They're probably more Tataric or Russian, if anything. But that's just my opinion. I mean, you can look at it. These people moved northward from southern Japanese islands during the last of the Ice Age melt. And they were known for looking very non-Japanese and almost European and Caucasian, and were known for being very physically robust. They were, however, not of European or Caucasian descent. They may have been somehow connected to the Denisovians of Siberia. The modern-day remnant population in Japan, and much lesser extent Korea, do have a larger than average genetic connection to modern-day Siberians. However, they are, or rather were, distinct. And there's a diagram here, a rough comparison between the Ainu and the typical modern Japanese and Korean person. I don't know if you can show that the two skulls.
I can see it now, yeah.
Okay, so you can see the two skulls facing each other. And on the left, you've got, I guess, the Japanese person. Mm-hmm. And on the right, you have the Ainu person. So there are some fairly significant morphological differences in the skull structures that are being discussed. Now, and that brings us sort of to Neanderthal. How did Neanderthal compare to modern man? Again, there's another picture here.
Yes.
Perfect. And then there's a modern-day Japanese of Ainu descent. Maybe you want to put that picture up as well.
Absolutely.
Now, the person doesn't look very Japanese, and yet his DNA does not match modern Europeans either. If his lineage was traced far enough back, would it connect with an earlier line which migrated through Asia to the Pacific in prehistoric times, is the question. Then had to migrate north to higher ground to Japan, Korea, and early China as the land flooded out during the last Ice Age, or the Younger Dryas. Dave, moving along?
Yeah, moving along. What did the earliest possible prehistoric Pacific Ocean travelling race look like? Were they similar in appearance with the ancient Japanese Ainu? Were they related to the Melanesians, which show Denisovian DNA genetic connection from Siberia? Were they simply their own isolated and now extinct genetic offshoot, which sailed across the oceans? Can we possibly find some stylized art created by those historically known ancient Pacific Polynesians who still remembered those who came before them and reflected that knowledge in their art and carvings? Now we have, I'm just going to put that on, we have I would say an artist's impression, and then we have the Easter Island figurines.
Right.
And that leads us to Easter Island. But Meki, before we do that, I just wanted to say that 700 years ago was when the Polynesians made it to New Zealand.
Yeah.
Only then.
Yep.
But there was already construction in New Zealand, which they said, the Maoris said, was here when we got here, and there was already historic trade with the people that lived there prior. But they weren't there when the Maoris arrived, apparently. Okay. Now, round about 700 years ago, there was a huge tidal wave that went across the Pacific, and it was kind of repopulated again. So, is it possible that the people in New Zealand were wiped out? Because we have evidence in Sydney, right, where we live, where like a 100-meter wave went over the top of the heads and filled the harbour all the way to the mountains and wiped out anyone who was living here, and it became repopulated again. But that's in Sydney in Australia. But New Zealand has a huge mountain range, and if you're on the other side of it, you might have escaped that inundation. So, don't know.
But the thing is this. So the modern and the academic view is that New Zealand was the last landmass on the planet to be colonized by humans.
That's what they say. Yeah.
That is the staunch official standpoint.
Yeah. That'll change as
Well,
as we've seen everything get pushed back in time, right?
it has to, Dave.
It has to.
It has to.
Yeah.
With the exception of Antarctica. Now, this is sorry to digress just for a second. We have to understand that in past times, long gone times, I guess, as well, Antarctica was ice-free. In fact, I think Antarctica may well have been populated because it's about the size of Australia, Antarctica, as a landmass.
It's big.
It's big. Oh yeah, it's again about the same size as the United States, right? As a landmass again, so big enough to sustain a massive population if need be. And I think if we were serious, we'd spend a lot more time digging up in Antarctica, archaeological digs to see what's there, to see if there's anything, But again, but even non-invasive. I mean, okay, maybe you don't want to destroy the pristine Antarctic environment. I get it, so you don't. So you use things like ground-penetrating radar. Okay, even LiDAR you could use, because if there were underground structures that you can't see, the ice on top of it would reveal it. Similarly to the jungle that reveals structures that you can't actually see, but the LiDAR can, because the light bounces back differently if there's structures underneath. It just does, right? And that's the whole point of LiDAR. And it would work in Antarctica, I reckon. I mean, even though there's several kilometers of ice. But even ground-penetrating radar, why not? I mean, we're using it today to find all kinds of deposits of whatever.
That's right.
What if we could find structures? Well, the thing is, they probably are doing it. We just don't know about it. So there's that.
That's right.
Which, Dave, brings us to Easter Island.
It sure does. Oh,
and you want me to read it? So, what if in prehistoric times, or prehistoric history, the Pacific was explored and colonized by these possibly ancient hybrids? We're talking about Denisovan, Neanderthal, Homo sapien hybrids, and we know that we interbred, and there was probably a lot more variety in the human experience, the human race, than we understand or know today. We do find megalithic structures throughout the Pacific island chains, everywhere. Yet oftentimes the islanders themselves clearly state they were built by some previous ancient people from long ago. This is the funny thing, a lot of native peoples don't claim credit. They say, no, we didn't build this. Someone else did. Someone else before us built it.
That's the difference between them and the Romans.
There's a difference between them, the Romans, and the Egyptians and us, in fact.
That's right.
A little known fact about Easter Island is that besides the well-known statues, there are also giant cut and placed megalithic blocks, which hail from a much earlier period in their history. There's some pictures here of those, and for all intents and purposes, they look exactly like the South American walls.
Yeah, they do.
Exactly. We are to believe that these people spent all their time carving, cutting, and moving giant statues and blocks, yet lived in huts and later in caves when a civil war broke out between the island's original two different types of people. Think about that one for a second. What if those early historically known islanders came across a few older statues perched on some of those possibly prehistoric blocks and emulated what they came across and started carving their own? There does seem to be a much larger percentage of lower quality, smaller statues from a much more recent period. Or, what if the later historically known Polynesian sailors came across a remnant population of a much older seafaring race, most of them, and most of which then went on to South America, whose descendants left their marks in places such as Machu Picchu, etc., which when asked by the Spanish if they, the Incas, in fact, had built them, the Incas said no. They laughed at them, and they stated very clearly that they were from a period ancient even to them. And there's a picture here of these ancient, well, they're not Incan walls, but we call them Incan walls these days. I mean, you look at them; they're just beautiful. They're actually aesthetically very pleasing. And there's some, there's the gate here, the sun gate.
That's right.
I mean, I look at this now. I'm thinking postmodernism. I look at this; it's just beautiful. There's a whole bunch of photographs here. Keeping with this line of thought, those earlier people later through the descending generations, aggregated down to a more modern appearance, say the cloud people. Who were the people the ancient Incas fought great battles with before they finally succumbed to the diseases that the Spanish brought with them in their conquest of the New World? Dave?
Yeah, how would an ancient crossbreed hybrid this far east appear? Well, again, one would assume they would have slight mixtures of features of both Neanderthals and modern man. They would theoretically have a slightly raised brow ridge, possibly larger than normal nose, and maybe even an extended rear cranial lobe. I've got one of those.
Me too.
Yeah. It seems that the above reconstructed image of the controversial Kennewick man recently found in the northwest US in the state of Washington fits the bill nicely. Many have commented on how when the reconstruction was viewed from the front, he resembled Patrick Stewart, the actor of Star Trek, Next Generation fame. So therefore must be of an early European connection. Kind of does, doesn't it? Make it so. There you go. There's the Olmec, the Kennewick man, and Patrick Stewart. How he comes into being in our show, it's crazy. Well, of course, we have no idea of what Kennewick man's hair, eye, and skin colour were, leaving him bald and pale. I, too, would agree that he does show many similarities with Europeans. But what if he were from another stock? What if the European predecessors and his ancestors came from a similar but much older line? Say of the Siberian Denisovan line. Meki.
Exactly right. And did you show them the comparison with Olmec, Kennewick, and Pet?
Yeah,
okay,
completely.
Perfect. I think we can do this. Now, what about the earliest Americans? And there's, of course, a lot to unpack there, but we're just going to stick with the text for now. Is there residual evidence of these early megalithic builders in the New World? And we do find many instances of early cultures and civilizations in the New World. We find huge megalithic blocks cut with extreme precision among the ruins that were outlined in a different thread here, referring to Tiahuanaco, Pumapunku, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
In it, the author discusses the possibility of the sites in question being much older than what is accepted by modern academia. And we would agree with this.
Yes.
But what about other locations, and not just Peru? Well, many here are familiar with Central American history of the Aztec, Mayan, and Olmecs, etc. What evidence do we find among their remaining relics? How did they portray themselves? It's interesting to note they had a rather peculiar way of portraying themselves. Oftentimes, they're shown with sloping foreheads, larger than average noses, and weak chins, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
If one looks closely, you may even see a small hint of an extended brow ridge, which makes for a rather unique experience. Wouldn't you agree? And there's
I'm
some
showing
pictures
those
here.
pictures.
Okay,
Totally.
great, perfect. And then elongated skulls as well. There's a comparison here between two skulls again facing each other, which is excuse me. There's Neanderthal, and then again a modern human being. And then please bear in mind, Neanderthals had significantly larger brains than we did. Significantly larger.
Mm-hmm.
One aspect of Neanderthals, and possibly others, that seems to be overlooked is how the back of their heads were shaped. Now, it is widely known among those who have studied the subject that they had a rather interesting rear protrusion known as the occipital protuberance, shown in the above image. Now, for argument's sake, let's say that in fact there were an ancient version of man who traveled the world in prehistoric times and settled throughout the globe, and his descendants or others who came later recognized the physical differences which they may have venerated and tried to duplicate through cranial manipulation of the shape of their skulls, resulting in the sloping forehead and rear bun. We see this type of activity all across the globe from many scattered peoples. There had to be something other than aliens to draw them together, or sometimes possibly a certain recessive genetic trait of this earlier crossbreeding comes out. Now, this is of course talking about cradle boarding, as we're all familiar with, but there are skulls that are naturally like this, which have been found in the Paca Pacohuamaca skull. What was the
Paracas.
Paracas? Thank you. The Paracas skulls. That and in fact we had the discoverer and the researcher on the show. We should get him again. We should get him back on the show, Dave, to talk about the skulls.
We've had him on the show twice.
Yeah.
He'd come back, not a problem.
Yeah. Now, scientists at Zurich-based DNA genealogist Center Igenia reconstructed the DNA profile of the boy pharaoh, that's Tutankhamun, who ascended the throne at the age of 9. His father Akhenaten and grandfather Amenhotep III, based on a film that was made for the Discovery Channel. The results showed that King Tut belonged to a genetic profile group known as haplogroup R1b1A2, to which more than 50% of all men in Western Europe belong, indicating that they share a common ancestor. Akhenaten and his descendants are all known for having odd-shaped, slightly elongated skulls, which have been speculated on from being a genetic abnormality, which was the result of a recessive genetic trait. There's an actual
I'm showing the scan.
computer scan here.
Yeah, that was his mother as well.
Correct. And if you look at these skulls,
yeah.
there's Akhenaten as well. He had an extremely elongated skull.
Mm-hmm.
There's a picture here as well. We'll put that here. And there's the Akhenaten, one of Akhenaten's 6 daughters. Again, extremely elongated skull. That brings us to who were the ancient megalithic builders, which I don't think I don't know, Dave. What do you think? Probably
No,
maybe
3
no?
minutes. Forget it.
Yeah, I don't think so. No, let's just mark it and save it for. So the question is, the question is, who were the ancient megalithic builders? And we'll discuss this, and Dave and I have our own opinions on this as well. But this author here is, of course, going to speculate. No, maybe it was this lost bloodline of humans. That's sort of a crossbreed between Denisovians, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, etc., etc. And then maybe other races that floated about. I mean, there are so many legends of other races. We only have, we have genetic evidence for, I think, 4 or 5 now, maybe 6, that are still within us. But maybe there were other races where the genetic, information just doesn't exist anymore, which is completely bred out of us.
Remember, there's a super ancient grouping of genetic information which they still haven't discovered the origin of.
Yes.
And that's in a lot of Europeans, and I have to say, maybe because the Paracas skulls apparently shared like ancient Tartarian DNA. Is there a common ancestor between the two of them? Must be.
Well,
who were they? Don't know. Yeah.
Look, we know very little of. See, because we made it easy for ourselves, Dave. In some ways, we just said anything before 10,000 years old. It's just people hunter-gatherers, and it's all the same.
Right.
And
easy.
And for 300,000 years, literally, for 300,000 years, nothing happened. Just think about that, just for a second. For 300,000 years, while Homo sapiens was in this particular shape, let's call it, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing happened. We know during that time, those 300,000 years, we were coexisting with 4, 5, 6 other races of Homo sapiens. We know that. and for 300,000 years, nothing happened. To be honest with you, I find this astounding.
We could have gone to the moon or had space flight and buggered off.
Completely. Yeah. Any trace of any civilization that even goes 100,000 years back to my earlier example would be completely gone.
Uh-huh.
And the thing is, the times, like I said, during the Ice Age, or during the Ice Ages even, the arable land that was available in this band around the equator, which is quite large, mm-hmm. gave us, I think, more land than we have today, and better land in many ways.
Yeah, that's right.
And people could get around the Earth a lot easier.
Oh, there's the music.
There's the music.
Oh, look, that's the end of today's Shiny Side Out show. You can catch us Tuesday and Thursday morning, 7 a.m. Eastern US time for Plato's Cave, and then we'll catch you again next weekend for Shiny Side Out. And in the meantime, Mickey, what do they do?
Be safe.